Hi guys, so the other night I watched the Salem's Lot adaptation from 1979. I had read the novel twice in the past, but I'd never actually seen this. But I've heard from time to time, mainly from older people, who say that this is something that really frightened them when it came on TV as a kid. I get the feeling that it's a bit of a minor cult classic among people who have seen it. And this is a really good time to be going back to that version because there's a remake coming out in October. The fact that there is a complete coincidence as far as I'm concerned, because the reason I'm here doing this is not because of that. It's more simply to do with the fact that I've been on a little bit of a King crusade the last few months. I've been reading and watching a lot of his earlier works, and here I am with Salem's Lot. But yeah, it is quite cool that there is another one just on the horizon. I actually watched the trailer for that the other night, and I think it looks pretty amazing, actually. It's now officially the film that I'm looking forward to the most this autumn. The fact that I've called this 79 version a film on the thumbnail might cause a little bit of consternation among some people. It's true that this did come out as a TV show originally. It's 3 hours in length. So probably it was released as like 2 lots of an hour and a half, maybe, or maybe 3 lots of an hour. But watching it the other night on Blu-ray, in 2024, it feels like a movie. Like the version I've got, there's no intermission. There's no obvious places where there would have been an episode break. There's no, big cliffhangers and then a cut to black and then suddenly it comes on again with more credits like halfway through. No, it's just one long continuous thing and it just feels like a really long movie. So I'm happy to describe it as such, even if it does cause a little bit of controversy. Now when it comes to something like Stephen King's The Stand, the adaptation of that was about 6 hours, I believe. So, yeah, I'm not going to call that a film, but, there are plenty of films out there that are 3 hours, so I'm content with my decision. Now, in terms of the plot for this, if you don't know what Salem's Lot is about, it's essentially about vampires. It's set in 1970s Maine in the northeast of America. Fictional town called Salem's Lot. A couple of guys move into this this house that overlooks a town. Like anywhere you are in this town, supposedly you can see this creepy-looking house on top of a hill. And at night times, these guys are turning people into vampires. So you've got a bit of an invasion of the body snatchers type situation, Bavas, demons, maybe, where as the story goes on, more and more of the characters are entering the bad guys' camp as vampires, and we have less and less human beings. So the odds are becoming more and more skewed in favour of the vampires as things go on, and it's down to a writer called Ben Mears to try and save the day. He's back in town. He did live in Salem's Lot as a kid, but he went away for the longest time. Now he's back, and seemingly he is the person most likely to prevent this town from completely being overrun by vampires. Now, the 3-hour runtime definitely has its pros and cons. On the plus side, it means there's far more time for characterization. So normally in horror films, they tend to run for about 90 minutes, and they find it hard to develop good characters. Even really good horror films often have characters whose backstory is a little bit skimped on. They're not developed that amazingly well, but there's no such problem in Salem's Lot. But after an hour, I felt like I knew a lot of the characters really well, that their relationships are really well defined, and it's just something that you can do when you have 3 hours to work with. But on the downside, the film being this long did mean that there were bits that sagged, mainly in the middle, I think, because the whole thing felt really novel to me in the early stages, getting to see all these characters that I'd only previously read about in pages, and towards the end it's obviously really exciting, but some of the stuff in the middle drags a little bit. I think maybe in an ideal world this would have been 2.5 hours instead of 3, just chop a little bit of fat off, but it's still a story that lends itself well to the longer format, I think, because the original town of Salem's Lot in the novel had so many characters, like dozens of characters. So this is the sort of thing where you could justify a longer runtime, but it certainly wouldn't work with most horror films. The casting is very interesting for this. So we've got David Soul playing Ben Mears. This is not an actor I've seen previously, I don't think. I never saw Starsky and Hutch. Now, whenever I've read the novel for Salem's Lot, I've always pictured Mears to be a dorky-looking writer, albeit somebody at the better-looking end of the dorky spectrum, somebody with short, dark hair. I think that's how he's described in the novel, I'm sure it is. But I certainly didn't expect with this to get a guy with long blonde hair who looks like he's on his way to an audition for Bullet. But David Soul plays this character with a lot of sincerity, I think. He's not walking around Salem's Lot with a lot of swagger as if he's trying to say, look, I know I'm in this cheesy TV horror movie, but come and cast me in something better, please. There's none of that. There's no posturing. He's taking this very seriously, and I think he does a very good job of convincing me that this is Ben Mears, despite the fact that the look is not entirely right. We've got Bonnie Bedelia playing Susan. Now, this casting totally surprised me. I did not expect this. Bonnie Bedelia is most famous, obviously, for Die Hard. She did those two movies at the end of the 80s, early 90s, and she did another bunch of famous stuff from around about that time. She was in that Harrison Ford film, Presumed Innocent. That would have been around about the same time as the Die Hards, I'm guessing. And she also did Needful Things. That would have been early 90s. So it seems to me like all her most famous works were at the same point of her life. I don't think I've seen her since the 90s. And I've certainly never seen her in anything from when she would have been a really young woman back in the 70s, because I was just taken aback when I saw her in this. She looks so fresh-faced and young. I've never seen her looking this young before, but she's perfect as Susan. I never would have guessed it. The hairstyle's perfect. The way she plays the part is perfect. The relationship between Mears and Susan is done very well in this. It helps they've got more time to work with, more scenes. The chemistry between David Soul and Bonnie Bedelia is very strong, I think. I had to laugh at how they meet at the start of this. They just have this random conversation down the park. You know, Susan's there reading her books and Mears just comes right up to her and off they get in conversation. It's just a very quaint sort of 1970s thing. I don't think you could meet somebody like that nowadays. Like, you go up to a woman in a park now in 2024, she's probably likely to react like this. What are you doing, you pervert? Go and meet somebody on Tinder like you're supposed to. But, you know, back in the 1970s in a town like Salem's Lot, it's all very idyllic looking. Everybody's very free and easy. You can just randomly meet somebody in the park. That's absolutely fine. And later that night, you might even get an invite to the parents' house. And the following day, you'll be buying a nice cheap house for $6,000 in a nice looking portion of Maine. And married to Bonnie Bedelia, I've probably got a very unrealistic view of what the 1970s were actually like. But yeah, it's noticeable watching this film that it does feel very 70s, but in a good way. Now, beyond the main two characters, there is one more really well-written character in this who is the cop. Like in a normal 90-minute horror film, this character would be very skimped over. He wouldn't look very competent as well. But in this, the main sheriff, if that's what he is, he's taken his job very seriously. He seems very astute. He makes a very smart decision in the final third to just get his family and get out of Dodge. I liked him a lot in this, actually. He's more or less the same as he was in the novel. There are other characters who have not been cast very well or treated very well in general. I'm mainly thinking of Matt Burke. Now, this was a brilliant character in the novel. He was like a 60-year-old teacher. He had bags of energy. He had a lot to say. He's just one of the main people in the Salem's Lot novel. But in this, not only have they changed his name to Jason Burke, which is just bizarre to me. Why would you do that? But they've cast this guy in his 70s. Honestly, it's like they've cast Sleepy Joe Biden. He's just got no energy. He seems to be the polar opposite of Burke as he was written in the novel. And I just cannot fathom it at all. There are other characters from the novel who are left out of this completely, which is a little bit odd given that they've got 3 hours to work with here. I'm mainly thinking of the guy who runs the town dump. In the novel, he likes to shoot rats, and I just remember him very vividly. He's been left out completely. And one or two other minor characters. Callahan the priest was a big character from the novel. He's in this, but his scenes are kept to a bare minimum, really. I hope that the reboot in October does a little bit more with Burke and Callahan and also brings the guy from the dump back. But I guess the main thing is they've done a lot of good work and a lot of good casting with the main characters at the top end, Susan and Ben. As I've already hinted at, the town itself looks fantastic in this. I don't know where they filmed this, but they've done a great job of bringing the fictional town of Salem's Lot to life. The Marsden house looks amazing as well. It looks better in this than I pictured it in my head when I was reading the novel. And I like the fact that in this film version, the house is side on to the road. It just feels really impersonal, but I would expect that from a house like this. You know, it's like the house is deliberately not wanting to appear to be welcoming to the rest of the town, so it's like turning itself on its side. I'm sure it was completely accidental on the filmmaker's part. The inside of the house looks terrific as well. Again, just better than how I pictured it when I was reading the book. I just don't have the greatest of imagination, I suppose. I think when I was reading the book, I just pictured a normal looking house on the inside that had extra cobwebs because of the fact that it's not really been lived in much, but it just looks so much better in this, and you've got characters creeping around the place. There's a kind of burned out feel to it, but certainly those scenes were just elevated compared to when I was reading the novel. There are some great scare scenes littered throughout this film as well. There's a famous one, or a famous bunch of scenes where child vampires are hovering outside the windows of other children, and it looks really freaky. Just the way that they're floating around on a piece of string in the fog, it has such an effect. It's really great, and I think they've mixed it well by having one of the child vampires actually get in. Now, this doesn't happen in the novel, I don't think, so it took me by surprise here, but it works very well, and then having it so that the main child character manages to resist later on. I think this is a change from the novel that works very well, and these scenes, they're just creepy as. The introduction to Barlow in this, i.e. the main vampire, very well done as well. So suddenly he turns up and kills this guy in a jail cell. Now, I don't remember anybody dying in jail in the book, so this whole jump scare was a real surprise, and I don't think I'd even pictured what Barlow was going to look like in this. So to suddenly see him in front of my face on the screen, out of nowhere, it did give me a start. And I think the two villains are done fairly well in this, albeit when it comes to Straker, he's a little bit older than I would have pictured, and he does resemble the Leyland Gaunt character from Needful Things a little bit too much, especially given the fact that he's opening a shop. I couldn't stop thinking about Needful Things during some of the early scenes involving Straker, but for the most part, I thoroughly enjoyed this adaptation. It does sag a little bit in places. There's one subplot involving a love triangle that drags on a bit, given the fact that two of these three characters just disappear from the movie, seemingly. I think a bit too much time spent with that, but I thoroughly enjoyed it on the whole. I could see myself watching this again, even though it is long. Ideally, it would be like half an hour shorter, as I've said, but definitely very impressed with this, and I'm curious to see how it will stack up against the inevitably more modern-looking one that we've got coming out next month. I've got one more criticism, actually. So at the very end of this, Susan turns up in Mexico, albeit she's sleeping when we see her. Totally different from the novel, and also utterly pointless. I get nothing out of this final scene between Ben and Susan on any kind of emotional level. I just don't know why they bothered with it. One of the biggest strengths of the original story was the fact that shit would happen, even to the best of the characters, and Susan is the biggest example of that. You've got this whole love story between her and Ben, and then suddenly, wham bam, she's taken out with like quite a bit of the book still to go. It was a very tragic thing to happen, but it just added to the brutality of Salem's Lot. To change that and have it so that Susan in vampire form is following Ben to Mexico, it's a pointless little addition. I mean, and I'm not going to dwell on it too long. As far as I'm concerned, this ends just before the final little stinger in Mexico. It's kind of pointless. Right, time to show you the version of the film that I've got for this. So here is my Blu-ray copy of Salem's Lot. It's got a very sharp picture. They've clearly done some work remastering this, albeit it's a little bit boxed in at the sides on my large TV. I mean, it didn't infringe too much. It only comes in a little bit off the sides, but I did notice it in the first couple of minutes. Probably forgot about it like 10 minutes later. It's not a big deal. There's an audio commentary on this by director Tobe Hooper. I should have mentioned the fact that Hooper did this much earlier on. This film just makes Hooper an even bigger legend in my eyes now, and I'm going to have to do a Hooper ranking at some point. I must have seen 10 films by him at this juncture, surely, I'm not sure, but this is a very good version of this, and it will slot quite neatly, I think, next to Carrie on my shelf. Maybe The Shining as well on the other side. Right, shall we get to the bag of terror and see what sort of score I'm going to give for this? So we got 1, 2, 3, 4 bloody axes out of 5. This was a really enjoyable experience for me. I enjoyed seeing the Salem's Lot novel brought to life, and I'm up for seeing another attempt at it being brought to life just next month. So I'll leave it there for today. Thanks for joining me. No reading update today. I haven't really gone too much further in the stand since I did my last reading update. So until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.